Hello, my name is Chris Peters, and you're listening to Native Pulse. Native Pulse is a production of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. We're located in Northern California in Wiyot country. We're a grassroots community-based foundation that provides grant support, technical assistance to Native communities throughout the world. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us a person who has been involved in climate change for many, many years. And his name is Uncle. I won't attempt to say his name in jeopardy of possibly slaughtering the name, and I'll ask him to introduce himself. But welcome to Native Pulse, Uncle. And maybe the first thing we can do is ask you to say your name.
My name is Angaangaq, and it means the man who looks like his uncle. I was named after my father's older brother. His name is Kuyagi, which means the beloved one. But he was named after his uncle Angaangaq, who was named after his uncle Kuyagi. So we go a long ways back. We just don't know exactly how long. But what we have learned now is that my family, my father's family, through his mother, we have lived in the same village next to the big ice in Greenland, on West Greenland, where Eric has been there for more than 5,000 years.
Early on, Uncle, I had the opportunity to hear you speak at the United Nations, and hearing that important message that you bring about to the world, indicating to people, hey, we better pay attention to what's going on because the ice is melting. Can you share some of that conversation?
Oh, yes. It started off a very long time ago. In 1975, in the month of June, my mom and dad decided that I should be a runner for the elders because I have moved to Canada because I didn't want to be living in an oppressed country as my country was. So, and I came home to visit, and then they had decided that I have traveled the world. I have started to travel the world, so they decided that I should be a runner for the elders. So they had invited many elders to their tiny little home. And the women had been busy making cakes and cookies and coffee and tea, and they were really amazing. And I became the formal runner for the elders. And I've been running until just last year in October, when my great aunt died just a few weeks before her 94th birthday. So now I'm the only one living of all these elders I ran for. And the message was really clear, that they wanted me to tell the world that the big ice is melting. That was 1975. But the melting started already back in 1963, because the young people went on a hunt to my grandmother's land. There on the beach of the big ice, there is a big finger of that ice. And there, they did ceremony like everyone else to say thank you to the great one, and if good hunt they had, and then the last one looked up on a big wall. That wall was 1.5 kilometers, which is about 1 mile tall, if you can imagine that. There, he noticed that there was drips coming out of the ice, drips of water coming out of the ice. So they went home and then by dog sled, and then the elders could not believe that how can water be running out of the big ice in month of November, in month of December, because it has already been cold on -35 Celsius at least for 3 months. But then they went on a hunt, what we call the spring hunt, after the new year of March 21. The elders themselves, they went up to the big ice after a good successful hunt, and they touched the big ice, and they looked up, and lo and behold, the water was still coming out of the big ice. So that's 5 months after it's been frozen -35 Celsius at least. So what has happened now, we have learned, and I was telling it to the scientists, that the summer melt, which Eric saw, because it's a living water, it had to come down somewhere through the cracks. And it came down so far down that it could not freeze or the winter cold. But because it's a living thing, water will go through any cracks and it starts to drip. But the velocity of the water coming through the cracks was so strong that it failed to freeze before it came out into the air itself. But then, of course, then it had to land, and that's what the young people experience. That's a long time ago. So I spoke about that first time in August of 1978 in New York City, of some kind of an environmental meeting of United Nations. So I've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah.
Now that big ice there, the finger, which was a mile thick, is less than 25 meters. That's 75 feet. And the big ice, we had to climb 500 meters before. Now we had to climb 300 meters below, and we had to walk 1 kilometer inland to reach the big ice. And that used to be more than a mile thick in the old days. It's coming out, and so the impact of it is really, really big. In our prophecies, or what I grew up with through my grandmother, my father's mother, is that big ice which melt. In those days, we did not have the idea what kind of impact it will have on Earth. Only me becoming a runner for the elders, I tried to travel the world, I realized how incredibly important it is. So I have attempted through my life, I'm now 73 years old. Through my life, I have attempted to make the world aware of it. But it's so interesting. I have met thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I have heard millions of people. But it seems to be coming in here and coming out there. And forget to stay there so they can think about it. Most importantly, they could not feel it. So it's even with the World Parliament of Religion, when I spoke to them first time many years ago, nothing came out of it. When I spoke to United Nations, Owen Lyons and I, we were speaking there with other elders, nothing happened to it. When I spoke to in Rio, in Tokyo, in Johannesburg, in Stockholm, in DC, and everywhere on Earth, nothing happened. And then at the end, I gave up. And at this Paris summit, I received hundreds of messages that I should come, and I refused to go. And they asked me, why don't you come? Why don't you come? I said, I have been to so many meetings, and this meeting in Paris would be no more than anything else. It would be just a talk. And lo and behold, they agreed, for nothing came out of it. So the Paris Agreement has not become living yet. How many more meetings do we need to go to before we realize that it is really dangerous for our well-being as humans, animals, plants, and the minerals of what we have done to Mother Earth? How many meetings do we need to go there? I attended, I don't know how many meetings in the world. I attended hundreds of meetings all over the world. And I talk, and this is where I really mean when I say that I've been instructed not to make a show of myself. I have worked so hard not to make a show of myself, but I've been so gentle, because if I become angry, I'm not very good. But nothing concrete has come and living amongst us are the agreements we have made or the meetings we have attended. Why is it so difficult to make things living, to save ourselves? We are the only ones who can save things. The animals will not, the plants will not, the minerals will not. You and I, we are the only ones with a spiritual side to us, a material side to us. And then what do? Should we go to another meeting? Will it help? The experience tells us that the impact I have is so tiny and nothing. The impact of United Nations is bigger, but nothing lives. So we have to really change ourselves, Chris. It's not just the organizations who need to change. It's the people themselves who need to change. My grandmother talks about that one day I will understand. But then my father comes in and says, it's not enough to understand. It's to comprehend what you understand. It's to comprehend what's happening we need to get to. If we don't comprehend the significance of what we're going through, yes, millions, billions will die. It's unimaginable. I was filmed by a television company in Germany, and I was in Florida with the scientists and the television crew. And the people of the government of Florida took us on tours and tells us that in Miami Beach, the city, the big city, they spend $400 million a year just to pump out the water from their streets, salt water, and the same amount in the island, because their cities are sinking, but they're not allowed to speak of it by the government. And be so kind that we don't tell the truth to them, that the rising of the water really will have an enormous impact on that beautiful country of my family called North America, let alone the Pan America, Caribbean, South America, North America, Europe. It will have an enormous impact. My father, my beautiful father, he says science is a knowledge. When it becomes wisdom, then it can live. Science is a mere knowledge like you and I, we know. But science is supposed to be elevated to wisdom. When will the scientists elevate themselves to the next level of reality within themselves so we can understand what they're talking about? I met one scientist in Angakkorsuaq many years ago. The big airplane left for Europe, and there were a few people left, and I saw a man alone sitting there. So I went up to him and greeted him and gave him a hug, and I sniffed at him like Eskimo kiss. And I asked him, oh, where are you from? He said, Colorado. I said, are you far away from home? Yes, I know, but I've been here for 19 summers studying the big ice. I got so excited and I told him, oh, have you spoken to my elders? And that man looked at me almost in disdain and said, your people have never gone to school. They never studied the big ice. They know nothing. I was so angry. I was so angry. I stood up and I spoke. The man cried. He'd been there 19 summers and never spoken to one single native person who lives with the big ice every single day for generations upon generations. who the heck does he think he is? Never speaking to my elders who have lived with that big ice for so many generations, for so many thousands of years. That's the way they treat us, like we know nothing. But I am the one who lives with the big ice. I walk on that big ice a million times. I can smell her. I can taste her. I can see her. I can touch her. I know what she does. She's a living thing. It's a frozen water. She has big waves, which changes every summer. Because frozen water moves constantly. That's why we have icebergs being born, because the frozen thing moves. And the man had the audacity to tell me that he never spoken to the elders because they never gone to school. But he himself studied the big ice at the university. That's the way it is. Would I say it more clear?
Absolutely not. And we find that all over the world. That scientists tend not to consider indigenous peoples and indigenous knowledge in this conversation, this very important conversation about climate change. And indigenous peoples live on the earth. They have a relationship to animals. They have a relationship to the events that are happening. And they look at it in a spiritual sense. And they know what's going to happen, but we are left out of the picture. Now, how do we get their involvement? How do we reach out to them and say, hey, we have a message. We have an important contribution to make to this subject. You know, we may not know all of the answers to this, you know, but we can suggest some very real, very viable first few steps that mankind must take before they can bring about change. So how do we get that? How do we get their involvement?
I've been thinking about it because of that Corona thing here. I am stuck in Ottawa, and because my wife is now sick with the Alzheimer's, she's in the hospital in the Alzheimer's home, so I had to stay here. And I long to go home, but I can't leave there. And I have been thinking and praying and doing my ceremonies to try to understand within myself, how can I, Angaangaq, a simple man, how can I contribute so the world begin to understand the significance of the indigenous world? Because they are the only ones left on earth who still do their ceremonies. Life is a ceremony in itself, worthy celebrating with a ceremony. I grew up with that teaching. So it's so important. But the rest of the world seem to be just completely oblivious everything. And the educated ones in the science community do not listen to us. You and I, we need to become stronger. We have to become like a trunk of a tree, so strong, which words cannot pull down. We have to become so strong that we can help them to blossom ourselves so they can find rest on us. That's what we need to be. So Chris, you and I, we need to become stronger, not to become overpowering by our words, but awakening the spirit of the world.
Thank you. That's fantastic. You know, a lot of folks are now saying, well, what are some of the ideas of indigenous peoples have for change? You know, we are stuck in a quandary, you know, and masses of people don't want to change. Huge numbers, millions and millions of people like to go on with the same type of addiction, I guess we call it addiction, to money, to possessions, to that material arm that you talk about. You know, they're so addicted to that, they don't want to change it. Without some good ideas, thinking about it. What are some ideas for bringing about change that is necessary in the world?
the world used to be indigenous to its own areas. We are the remnants of that. We are the remnants. So I am an indigenous of the biggest island on earth. That's where I grew up. I know my land inside out. I know the water. I know the ocean. I know the land. I know the big ice. You come from that amazing country of California with a big forest. There has always been forest fires, but you've been able to manage it. But now the modern man cannot, because they simply do not know how to. So spiritually, they have become idled. For them, it seemed to be religion important. Religion, 9 big religions, and tonight, when you and I we go to sleep, some people would have been killed because of their religion. So it's a spirit we need to open. The spirit of a person, that beautiful heart they have, that amazing capacity of thinking of things which are better for tomorrow, that's the one we need to awaken. When we do that, then we can really talk equally to each other and create that balance which doesn't exist today. It's like the eagle, you know, in my land, we have that duality, which is the sea eagle, the sea eagle which eats from the big ocean. In my language, we say that one day, I'm gonna have to be like an eagle. My left wing, which is my spirit, and my right wing, which is far away from my heart, I can be able to lift myself up. So I can soar to new heights, and then a new existed within me. And then that's when I will become strong. That's what you and I, what we need to do, to make people aware that they are just like the eagle, but they had to be in balance. When the eagle had to lift, the wings had to be equally strong. If not, she will not be able to lift. The same thing when she has to land, the wings had to be equally strong, otherwise she will crash. And I'm a hunter. Right now, the seabirds are leaving my country. And then before they leave, we hunt them with the nice and thick, with lots of good fat, fish fat in them. And I've seen so many birds who land on the ocean were not having the balance because of the winds around them. And they crashed, and so many birds we had to pick up because they died and broke their necks. So it happens everywhere. In the bird world, it happens. In human world, it happens. So it's so important to create the balance for you and I, for all the indigenous world, so they can see us not being better than them, but equal with them.
Thank you. My name is Chris Peters, and you're listening to Native Pulse. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Uncle, talking about an important subject that impacts all of us, impacts the world, impacts all living creatures, and that is climate change. And it's upon us. It's here. It can, and Native people's voices, as been presented here, hasn't been made important enough to listen. So we're talking about that. So Uncle, I am grateful that you're a part of this program and being with us here today. Can you talk about, climate change in its impacts on all people? And you mentioned oceans rising, but and mentioned the fires in that's happening, the climate related fires that's happening. What other things have you seen throughout the world in your travel?
I was in India 2 times this year, because I was supposed to be meeting with the Dalai Lama, but because of Corona, at the end of last year, he could, the I couldn't because the war started between Pakistan and India. And then this year I was back there, and then because of Corona, he couldn't come, so I didn't meet him. So it's really interesting that incredible country of India is running out of water. Because the big ice on the big mountains, the roof of the world, is melting. And the 7 rivers of India are running out of water. That's more than 1 billion people. What should we do? My family in Australia, they're drying out. My family in the United States, they're running out of water. The big forest, Amazonia, is being burned. They have no more homes. What should we do? Europe is starting to change now. What should we do? We really need to begin to look at each other equally, every one of us. My grandmother says, in the East, when the sun rises, the sea is always yellow. And because of TV, we have realized there are actually yellow people on this earth. They're really beautiful people. In the South, when sunshine highs, the one sea is always white. And now we have learned that there are actually white people living on this earth. And now I visited them, many of them, and they're really beautiful people. In the West, when the sun sets, sea is always red. And now we have learned through TV that they're actually red people, and you are now a part of them. And at night, it's always black. Now we have learned through TV there are actually black people on this earth, which is so interesting. When you look at my instrument, her name is Qilaut, which means an instrument from the great sky. It's like a circle. It has no beginning and it has no end. And we all belong there. Every one of us equally. One is not better than the other. We are all equal. The only ones who have left their thing of doing things, which is called ceremony, is us. We do ceremony every day. I put our medicine of the earth out of my balcony every day. Why? Because I grew up with that thing. I lifted up, touched my heart and lifted up and show him that I have some medicine of the earth. And I drip him out to the lamp below me because I live on the 3rd floor. So I put him down. Why? Because I was told that life, my life, is worth being celebrated with a ceremony. If it is, then I do it.
So, Uncle, people need to change, you know, and we say by force, you know, because the climate is such that it is, they'll be forced to change, or they can make a conscious and intellectual decision to bring about change that we need. And that conscious decision that people need to have comes from the heart, definitely, as you talked about. But can you recommend a few important steps that will cause change in America and in the world that people need to take? You know, what are some of the ideas of change that we as human beings need to make in this state that we're in now of very significant crises of climate change? What do we need to do?
I guess the most important thing for me is for me to become aware of myself, deeper than I am. The old teachings of my people, they say that you are deeper than the deepest of oceans of earth within you. So that means you are really deep. Every one of us are really deep, but we've never been there ourselves because we live on the surface of it. We don't go down to the depth of us. And then they say that the great sea eagle will soar to new heights within you never knew existed within you. So those two things, the depth you carry and the height you can reach, are really important for people to become aware. That will take us to the next level of reality, which we in English will call consciousness, the next level of consciousness. I was privileged enough to be serving for about 10 years on a small commission called the Global Consciousness, the Commission of Global Consciousness Spirituality. And it was really interesting to travel the world with them and to attempt to teach the world that we are really worth it, all of us. We have a depth inside yourself, as the old teaching tells us. I am deeper than the 11 kilometers inside me, because the deepest ocean, second deepest ocean, is in Greenland, in East Greenland. So I am that deep, but do I ever go there? I'm learning. And then when the spring comes, the eagles return to the north, and she was so high that we could hardly see her, way up in the sky. And they say that I can soar like an eagle. I come to new heights I never realized existed within me. That's what we need to bring to this world.
Thank you. I think that's an important contribution, that people need to look into themselves, that change starts with us as human beings. And it's time that we get some reality, some eye-opening experiences that allows us to get to those depths and those heights. And we need to do it soon. Again, the scientists, and I hate to keep suggesting the scientists know anything, but they say we have maybe 10 to 15 years to bring about change. That consciousness, that looking at self, that self-actualizing, if you will, experience that people need to have. We have 10, maybe 20 years max before change cannot be retrieved, that we've gone too far. So we're situated with a short fuse to cause massive change in the world. And I enjoy our conversations because I think it adds to a lot of that. And we will get this out as broadly as we possibly can. But people have to listen. People have to hear. And put the finger in the other hole so it doesn't escape. You know, so it stays up here, gets into the heart, and to bring about change. So, you know, I think it's interesting to look at the big ice. And, you know, and some of the reflections that you've had are very important. You know, the ice is melting. But maybe you can share a little bit of your history about the big ice, your family history, your ancestors' history. And if we ventured on the ice, we'd get cold fast and not survive. How did your people survive?
So interesting, you know, when you come to my land and you walk on that land, then you realize that it's really different world, because that's the only land on earth where people live where there has never been war. So, and it is also the oldest crust of earth. So when you get there and you walk on that land, then, and this time of year, as you walk, the sun goes down, and then you look up to the sky and you see the big sky. And because there's no trees, the big sky is really, really big. And there will dance those northern lights, which are your ancestors. Because every time I remember somebody who lost me and whom I loved, that person will become so happy that he or she will immediately invite entire family, all the friends and all the relations, and dance for me. That's the importance of that land, that they remembered the ancestors and the ones to come further ahead. We will call the next generations to come. They didn't tell us for the fun of it that I was impacted 7 generations ago, and that I myself, Angaangaq, will have an impact 7 generations to come. They didn't say that for the fun of it. He gave us that teaching to understand that I was impacted by my ancestors 7 generations ago, and I myself will have that impact 7 generations to come. And those ancestors are above me this time of year, called Northern Lights. And they dance 2,400 kilometers per second. That's how fast they move. And they cover the entire sky. We have forgotten that. We must not forget that. We must not forget that. We must be aware that we are not alone on this earth. We are almost 8 billion of us. We are not different from each other. We just have forgotten important things about ourselves. We only have one earth. We have learned that. And there's no other things we can move to. If we really want to make a beautiful life for our generation to come, we have to become aware of ourselves equally.
Thank you very much. And I was wondering if you might want to share another chant with us. Just a brief chant for us to end the program. And as the host of Native Pulse, we thank you for being with us. And we would like to end the program with Uncle and his beautiful music.
Yes, there's a beautiful chant. It's called Melting the Ice in Your Heart. They do say, the old people, that only by melting the ice in the heart of man, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. So I give it to your listeners in prayer that the ice in their heart will melt, so they can learn to use their knowledge, vast knowledge they have, wisely. Oh, oh, oh,